Night after night, Soviet radar crews watched their screens light up with impossible blips, echoes far above any Soviet fighter's reach. Dismissed as glitches or birds, these mysterious shadows were ignored until evidence emerged that they were American U-2 spy planes calmly photographing the heart of the USSR. When the truth surfaced, it would shatter Moscow's sense of control and trigger a scramble with consequences the world still feels today. But how did so many warnings go unheeded? A low hum fills the bunker, broken only by the click of a pencil against a clipboard. Lieutenant Petrov sits hunched at his console, collar tight, eyes fixed on the green sweep of the radar. The air is thick with the smell of old electronics and sweat, a world away from the cold night outside. He marks each contact by habit, commercial flights, scheduled military patrols, the steady pulse of Soviet air traffic. Then a faint echo appears, far above the usual pattern, drifting across the upper edge of the display. Petrov blinks and leans closer. The altitude readout hovers near 20 kilometers, higher than any aircraft he's ever tracked. His hand hesitates over the alert switch. A fellow operator, older with weary eyes, glances over. "Probably birds," he mutters, voice flat. The words land like a ritual, a shield against the unknown. Petrov's training flashes through his mind, protocols drilled into every conscript, blips that don't match expected flight profiles, especially at that altitude, are often flagged as interference. Atmospheric conditions, temperature layers, even cosmic rays can play tricks on the screen. And then there's the unspoken rule: don't call in a false alarm. Errors mean paperwork, questions, maybe worse. He logs the anomaly with a half-hearted note, high echo, likely weather, and lets the sweep continue. Around him, the crew sinks back into routine. Someone stifles a yawn. Another flips through a manual, pretending to study. The room is heavy with a sense of practiced confidence, the kind that comes from months without incident. Soviet air defense, they've been told, is the best in the world. No enemy can cross these skies without being caught. Yet Petrov can't quite shake the feeling that something is off. The blip was too steady, too clean to be noise, but he remembers stories from training, how over-reporting could end a career just as quickly as missing a real attack. Better to say nothing unless there's proof. The system, after all, is designed to catch bombers, not ghosts. In the back of the room, a supervisor scribbles signatures on the nightly log, eyes never leaving the clock. The shift will end soon. Another crew will take over, inherit the same screens, the same protocols, the same unspoken doubts. As the hours crawl by, Petrov's mind drifts. Maybe it really was birds, or a quirk of the equipment. Maybe tomorrow will bring another echo, or maybe nothing at all. The bunker's lights dim for dawn, and the world outside remains silent. No alarms, no scrambling jets, no urgent calls from command. Just a single unexplained trace fading from memory as quickly as it appeared. In this room, on this night, the lines between vigilance and routine blur. The radar sweeps on, searching for threats that everyone believes will never come until the day one does. On July the 4th, 1956, Soviet radar screens from the Baltic coast to the heart of Russia began recording something unusual. A high-altitude track appeared near the East German border, moving steadily northeast. Controllers in Leningrad logged the blip as a high-altitude anomaly. Fighters scrambled from nearby bases, but their ceilings topped out well below the target's height. The radar returns showed the object cruising at over 20 kilometers, twice the altitude of any known bomber. In Moscow, the incident triggered a quiet but urgent cable to the American embassy. The Soviets accused the United States of violating their airspace, but the protest was delivered in measured terms, careful not to reveal the limits of their own defenses. The next day, July 5th, another track appeared. This time, the mysterious intruder crossed over Moscow itself, then veered toward Kaliningrad and the Khimki industrial district. Radar logs from multiple stations recorded the passage, each noting a target well above the reach of their interceptors. MiG crews waited on standby, but no scramble order came. The altitude rendered any pursuit pointless. By the time the Blip vanished from Soviet scopes, it had spent hours over some of the USSR's most sensitive sites. The only evidence left behind was a series of faint, steady echoes in the nightly logs and a growing sense of frustration among air defense crews. Over the next year, the pattern spread far beyond the western borderlands. In the spring of 1957, 5 more high-flying intruders crossed deep into Siberia. Radar stations near Novosibirsk and Irkutsk tracked objects at altitudes between 19 and 21 kilometers. The logs from these remote posts used phrases like phantom echo and probable interference, but the consistency of the tracks raised doubts. Controllers debated whether to escalate, but the same dilemma played out. No Soviet fighter could reach the altitude, and the radar signals, though persistent, lacked the clarity needed to justify a full alert. The incidents were dutifully reported up the chain, where they joined a growing pile of unexplained events. In the capital, the mood was shifting. Each new overflight added to the list of airspace violations, but public statements remained vague. The Kremlin's protests to US diplomats avoided specifics, hinting at violations without admitting that the aircraft had crossed deep into Soviet territory. Behind closed doors, however, the records were clear. The mysterious high-altitude objects were appearing across the breadth of the country, from the Baltic to the Far East. Regional radar crews found themselves caught between routine and uncertainty, logging each event with careful language that protected them from blame but signaled unease to their superiors. By mid-1957, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Reports from radar stations across multiple time zones described the same phenomenon: steady, high-altitude tracks that could not be explained by weather, birds, or known aircraft. The pattern was too widespread, too consistent to dismiss. Yet, without a technical means to intercept or identify the intruders, the Soviet air defense system could only watch and record. The Blips became a kind of open secret, acknowledged in logs and whispered about in control rooms, but never fully confronted. The question lingered: what exactly was crossing the Soviet Union's skies, and how long could it go unanswered? Lockheed's Skunk Works, led by Clarence Kelly Johnson, faced a problem no one else had solved: how to build an aircraft that could soar above the reach of any enemy fighter or missile. The answer took shape in the U-2, an airplane that looked more like a glider than a spy plane. Its wings stretched over 100 feet, long and narrow to lift the slender fuselage into the stratosphere. Every ounce was shaved to keep the weight down. The airframe, built from lightweight aluminum alloys, was so delicate that ground crews called it fragile, but that fragility was the price of altitude. Inside the U-2's frame, a single jet engine, first the General Electric J-73, later the more powerful Pratt & Whitney J-75, pushed the plane to heights over 21 kilometers, or roughly 71,000 feet. At that altitude, the air is so thin that the difference between stalling and breaking the sound barrier is barely 10 knots. Pilots called it the coffin corner. They flew with constant tension, always a few heartbeats from disaster. The plane cruised at Mach 0.6, slow for a jet, but speed was never the shield. Height was. Cameras and sensors filled the belly and nose, but there were no guns, no missiles, nothing but film, and the hope that nothing could reach them. Flight testing began in 1955 at secret desert strips. Johnson's team watched as each new article, the term for each airframe, climbed higher than the last. In June 1956, test pilots logged flights above 74,000 feet. The U-2 could cruise for hours at the edge of space, capturing images sharp enough to spot a truck from miles above. Every mission pressed the limits of physics and pilot nerve. The design's only real defense was altitude. On paper, Soviet interceptors and anti-aircraft guns topped out at 15 or 16 kilometers. Even the latest fighters, like the Su-9, could barely scrape 20 kilometers in a climb, and only for moments. The U-2's margin was slim, but it was enough. By the time the first overflights began, the CIA believed the U-2 was untouchable. Its glider-like wings, featherweight construction, and high-flying engines gave it a sanctuary above the clouds. For Johnson's team, the numbers told the story: 21.5 kilometers, Mach 0.6, and a camera lens that could see across borders. The gamble was simple. If nothing could reach that high, nothing could stop the U-2. Soviet air defense planners trusted that their radar network and interceptors formed an unbreakable shield, but the reality was far less certain. Most Soviet radars in the 1950s, like the P-30 and P-35, were designed to spot mass bomber formations at medium altitudes, not single needle-thin targets at the edge of space. At heights above 18 kilometers, radar coverage grew patchy. The beams, shaped like overlapping fans, left gaps at steep angles. Signals from anything flying at 20 kilometers or higher often appeared faint or intermittent, especially if the target crossed between stations or slipped through the seams of coverage. Operators called these moments phantom echoes, and the system manuals offered little guidance for tracking something that hovered just beyond reliable detection. Interceptor squadrons faced an even tougher challenge. The MiG-15 and MiG-17, mainstays of the Soviet Air Force, struggled to climb above 15 or 16 kilometers. Even the newer Su-9 Fishpot, rushed into service after test flights, showed it could briefly reach 20 kilometers, could only manage that ceiling under ideal conditions and only for a minute or two before fuel and air ran out. On paper, the Su-9 promised a solution. In practice, pilots found themselves chasing shadows, their jets gasping for air as the mysterious intruder cruised serenely 1 kilometer above their reach. The technical gap was not lost on those who studied the radar plots. Diagrams showed the problem in stark terms. The radar elevation lobes left blind spots directly overhead, and the range for reliable tracking shrank as targets climbed higher. Project Rainbow, a US attempt to make the U-2 invisible to Soviet radar, had failed, but it hardly mattered. The U-2's best defense was not stealth, but altitude. Soviet planners quietly acknowledged that for now, their vaunted air defense could only watch and record as high-flying objects slipped through the seams. Each unexplained blip in the logs was a reminder that the border, so solid on maps, was full of holes in the sky. April 1960. A U-2 reconnaissance plane crosses into Soviet airspace, its silhouette invisible to any eye, but not to the network of radar stations stretching from Kazakhstan to the Urals. The aircraft's path arcs over Semipalatinsk, the nerve center of the Soviet nuclear program. For more than 6 hours, watch officers at scattered posts log its progress. Each entry notes the altitude, above 20 kilometers, beyond the reach of any interceptor on standby. The track is steady, unhurried, and unmistakable. On the ground, the sense of routine falters. The radar picture leaves no doubt. The intruder is real, and it is photographing the most sensitive military sites in the country. The duration alone is staggering. 6 hours over Soviet territory, with no meaningful challenge from the air defense system. At Semipalatinsk, the U-2 circles and banks, mapping test towers, bunkers, and missile pads. In the command posts, teletypes chatter out reports, but the response is fragmented. Some stations relay their sightings up the chain. Others, unsure of protocol, file them away for later review. The information accumulates in a bureaucratic limbo. No single officer has the authority, or perhaps the nerve, to demand a direct response. The system, built to repel massed bomber raids, is caught flat-footed by a solitary plane flying higher than any doctrine ever imagined. Regional commanders trade terse calls, seeking clarification from Moscow. Orders filter down to scramble interceptors, but the MiGs and Su-9s can only claw at the lower edge of the U-2's altitude. Pilots report visual contact with a contrail, nothing more. By the time fighters reach their ceilings, the target is already a distant speck, out of range and out of options. On the ground, frustration grows. Duty officers consult manuals, check equipment, and recheck bearings. Some question whether their sets are calibrated correctly. Others quietly blame the gaps on outdated hardware or ambiguous procedures. In the margins of logbooks, notations pile up. Unidentified high-altitude aircraft, no engagement possible. The aftermath is immediate and severe. The overflight exposes not just a technical shortfall, but a crisis of confidence in the entire air defense apparatus. Reports from regional posts reach the desks of senior generals who realize with alarm that the U-2's route passed directly over the heart of the Soviet nuclear complex, all but unopposed. The magnitude of the failure is impossible to disguise. Within days, a commission is ordered to audit every detail: radar logs, readiness drills, communication protocols, and the actions of every officer on duty that day. Files are pulled from safes, and the hunt for explanations begins. In the silence that follows, the lesson is clear. The sky is not as secure as the Kremlin had believed. The U-2's 6-hour journey over Semipalatinsk has made that fact undeniable. The Commission's work began with stacks of unread reports. Over months, radar stations from the Baltics to Central Asia had logged high-altitude tracks, sometimes with detailed coordinates and estimated flight paths. Many of these records sat in file cabinets, never reaching the desks of senior commanders. Some were marked for review, others simply ignored. When investigators called in duty officers from the Semipalatinsk region, they found that warnings about repeated overflights had been treated as routine anomalies. The paperwork told a consistent story. Information existed, but no one acted on it. Equipment audits revealed another layer of negligence. Several advanced height-finding radars, capable of tracking objects above 20 kilometers, had been left in standby mode or powered down to conserve components. Maintenance logs showed that some of these sets had not been recalibrated in weeks. Operators admitted they rarely used full detection settings, citing orders to avoid unnecessary wear. Communications relays meant to link radar posts with fighter regiments were either overloaded or poorly configured, leaving gaps in the handoff of critical data. The Commission found that at key moments, technical capacity had been present, but the system failed to bring it to bear. Training records painted a picture of complacency. Many radar crews had never drilled for high-altitude, single-aircraft intrusions. Manuals emphasized detection of mass bomber raids at medium altitude, not lone targets at the edge of space. When questioned, officers described a culture where ambiguous tracks were often chalked up to jamming or weather interference, especially if they could not be corroborated by neighboring stations. The Commission noted that in some units, the standard procedure was to log these blips as technical issues rather than potential threats. In other cases, reports were filed away for later analysis, only to be forgotten as new shifts took over. The Commission's findings landed on Marshal Sergei Biryuzov's desk with grim clarity. Khrushchev himself demanded answers, summoning the Air Defense Chief to account for the failures. In a closed meeting, the First Secretary's accusation cut through the room. Shame! You cannot shoot down a subsonic aircraft. The rebuke was public, the consequences immediate. Biryuzov defended his service, blaming equipment shortages and ambiguous protocols, but the message from above was unmistakable. Senior officers received formal reprimands. Some were quietly reassigned or demoted. The chain of command, from regional commanders to radar supervisors, felt the pressure. Files were purged and new directives ordered a complete overhaul of alert procedures. In the weeks that followed, radar coverage maps were redrawn, and Flight routes for interceptors were recalculated to better match the corridors favored by the mysterious intruders. Height finders were brought online around the clock. Training schedules shifted to include high-altitude tracking drills. Every radar return, no matter how faint, was now flagged for immediate review. The Commission's audit had exposed a system built on routine and myth, forced overnight into a posture of vigilance. The bunker lights burned later, and the air defense network braced itself for whatever might come next. Engines roar to life on the tarmac outside Sverdlovsk as ground crews scramble to clear the runway. Radio chatter crackles with urgency. In the cockpit of a silver Su-9, Captain Igor Menchukov straps in, oxygen mask tight, eyes fixed on the altimeter. Orders come fast and clipped. Intercept the unidentified target at maximum altitude. The Su-9's turbojet howls, and the jet leaps from the Earth, climbing steeply into the thin morning air. Every gauge pushes into the red. At 19,000 meters, the controls grow sluggish. The canopy frosts over. Menchukov's breath comes in shallow bursts, his vision tunneling as the sky turns black above him. Ground control vectors him towards the intruder, a single steady blip at the very edge of the radar's reach. The U-2, cruising at over 21 kilometers, is just a glint in the sunlight, almost invisible against the stratosphere. Menchukov pushes the Su-9 higher, the jet straining for every extra meter. The altimeter needles past 19,500 meters, just shy of the U-2's path. He spots the American plane, its long wings gleaming, and lines up for a shot. The guns jam, no time to fix it. He banks hard, dives, and tries to ram the U-2 from below. The air is too thin, the distance too great. The Su-9 stalls, shudders, and drops away. Menchukov curses, fighting to recover control as the U-2 slips past, untouched. On the ground, controllers watch the radar returns cross their screens. The fighter's ceiling has been reached. There is nothing more the pilots can do. In the command bunker, frustration mounts. With interceptors spent and the intruder still overhead, all eyes turn to the missile crews. The clock ticks down. The next move is out of the pilot's hands. A cold wind sweeps across the fields near Sverdlovsk as the surface-to-air missile crews brace for orders. Inside the command van, a colonel stands over the plotting table, listening to rapid-fire updates from radar posts. The track of the U-2 is clear, 19 kilometers above the ground, holding course at Mach 0.6. At 8:53, the signal comes through. Engage. The battery commander barks the sequence, and a salvo of SA-2 guideline missiles erupts from their launch rails, leaving white scars in the morning sky. Operators track the target on their scopes, voices tight with focus. The first missile climbs, guided by radar beams that cut through the stratosphere. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a sudden spike on the tracking display, detonation. The explosion shreds the tail section of the U-2. Fragments spiral away as the plane pitches violently, breaking apart under the strain. In the control van, relief and disbelief mix as the radar echo vanishes. The crew logs the engagement. One confirmed hit, altitude 19,000 meters, target destroyed. Outside, the air still vibrates with the aftershock of the launch. The men step out, scanning the horizon for falling debris. They know what this means. For years, high-flying intruders slipped past, untouched. Now the missile crews have done what the fighters could not. Minutes later, reports filter in. Wreckage spotted on the ground, a parachute drifting down. The battery logbook records the time and coordinates. The KGB arrives to secure the site, and word spreads up the chain of command. The Soviets have brought down an American spy plane at the very edge of the possible. In the bunker, the crew stands a little taller. The echo of the kill shot will ripple far beyond the Urals, shattering the illusion of invulnerability at 70,000 feet. The fields outside Sverdlovsk are scattered with twisted metal, scorched earth, and fragments of silver skin. Within minutes of the missile strike, Soviet security teams converge on the crash zone. The air is sharp with the tang of fuel and burning wire. A battered parachute lies tangled in the brush, and nearby Francis Gary Powers sits stunned, his flight suit torn, his hands already bound by KGB guards. The search is methodical. KGB technicians, gloves tight against the cold, sift through the debris, logging each find. They recover the U-2 plane's cameras and, astonishingly, several rolls of exposed film. The canisters are intact, their labels stamped with American codes. Technicians pack them for immediate transport to Moscow. The plane's wreckage yields more secrets: high-resolution lenses, electronic gear, and a cockpit voice recorder. Each item is catalogued and photographed under the eyes of Central Committee observers. Powers is silent as he is led away, flanked by armed escorts. He is searched for hidden weapons or documents, but the only items found are a map, a survival kit, and a silver dollar concealing a poisoned needle, evidence of his orders if capture seemed inevitable. The KGB team notes the failed self-destruct charges on the camera bays. The film inside is unburned, a stroke of luck for Soviet intelligence. As the convoy pulls away from the site, word spreads through the command chain. The Americans' most prized spy plane has been brought down, and the evidence is in hand. Powers is transferred to a secure holding cell where he faces hours of interrogation. In Moscow, the first frames of reconnaissance film are developed, revealing detailed images of missile sites and airfields. The proof is undeniable. For the Kremlin, the capture of Powers and the recovery of his equipment offer not just a propaganda coup, but concrete leverage in the diplomatic storm about to break. Rain spatters the tarmac outside Le Bourget as convoys roll past the Palais des Nations. Inside, the Paris summit opens under a cloud of suspicion. Four leaders, Eisenhower, Khrushchev, de Gaulle and Macmillan, arrive with prepared speeches, but the agenda is already in tatters. Soviet delegates carry photographs of the U-2 wreckage and a dossier of decrypted cables. The Americans, caught off guard, scramble to update their talking points. Khrushchev enters the chamber holding a sheaf of documents, fragments of Powers' flight plan, images from the recovered film, and a typed confession in Russian. He demands an apology, an end to American overflights, and punishment for those responsible. Eisenhower, grave and deliberate, admits to authorizing the flights but refuses to apologize. The room falls silent as Khrushchev pounds the table, denouncing the United States for violating Soviet sovereignty and lying to the world. French and British leaders attempt mediation, but the gulf is too wide. The Soviet delegation walks out, leaving empty chairs and a stack of evidence on the table. Within hours, cables flash between Paris, Washington, and Moscow, each side blaming the other for the breakdown. The summit, once billed as a chance for détente, collapses in acrimony. No agreements are signed, no joint statement is issued. For the Kremlin, the shootdown and the summit's failure become proof of Western aggression. In Washington, Eisenhower's team braces for a diplomatic freeze. The cost is immediate and public. Trust between superpowers evaporates, and the world is left watching as two nuclear rivals drift further apart. In the aftermath of the U-2 shootdown, both superpowers turned their attention to the next frontier. In Washington, a classified memo landed on the president's desk. The era of manned overflights was ending. The loss of Powers and his plane forced American intelligence chiefs to accelerate projects that had lingered in laboratories and boardrooms. Funding for the Corona satellite program was doubled almost overnight. By August 1960, the first successful film capsule dropped from orbit, parachuting into the Utah desert with grainy but unmistakable images of Soviet missile fields. For the first time, reconnaissance did not require risking a pilot's life or violating airspace with a winged intruder. At Lockheed's Skunk Works, the pressure was relentless. Engineers led by Clarence Johnson worked around the clock on a new machine, the A-12 Ox cart. Its titanium frame and razor-thin profile promised speeds above Mach 3 and cruising altitudes near 90,000 feet, far beyond the reach of any known missile. The Defense Department poured millions into the program, with directives signed in quick succession. By 1962, test flights at Groom Lake showed the Oxcart's black silhouette streaking across the upper atmosphere, a ghost on most radars. The Soviets, stung by the embarrassment of earlier years, responded in kind. New battalions of S-75 Davina surface-to-air missiles ringed their major cities and test sites. Height-finding radars and command posts multiplied across the steppe. Air defense budgets soared, and the PVO training manuals were rewritten to treat every unexplained trace as a potential threat. The contest for the sky no longer played out only in the cockpit or the control room. It had moved to the drawing board and the launch pad, where the future of surveillance and the balance of power would be decided by engineers, code breakers, and the silent eyes of satellites. Today, surveillance satellites cross every border in silence, and airspace is never truly sovereign. The U-2's legacy lives on in each new attempt to outpace detection, fueling a global race where secrecy and suspicion still shape policy. As technology blurs the line between sky and spy, one truth endures. What is invisible overhead can change the world below in an instant. What else escapes notice right now? Share your thoughts in the comments.